What's happening, everybody? Welcome out. We have a great topic tonight. We're going to talk about something that we kind of touched base on last week, and we thought we would dig a little deeper into it because we felt as though it was a topic that really could use a full episode. And, it piggybacks onto a little bit of the Sailor Jerry piece that Justin and I were talking about last week. So we are going to get into that tonight. We are also going to get into Miami Inc. and some of the other TV shows that have kind of had their good points and bad points as far as the craft itself. I saw something today where uh, it was a pretty well-known tattoo artist. I got to fix my mic here in a second because I feel like I'm like bent over. Um, Pretty well-known tattoo artist, and he was like, "You shouldn't call it an industry. Tattoos are handmade. It's a craft. Industries are for production lines and cars." And
Oh, well, let's call it an industry then.
and I'm like, "No, man. I mean, I think he had a legit gripe. He's old school, well-known tattoo artist."
No, I'm being funny. Like with the new, it's more production line than it was. Less craft based than it was.
He was saying that that's you're part of the problem if that's you're calling it an industry.
You know what the weird thing about Miami Inc. was? Everybody on Miami Inc. had real serious reasons for getting tattooed. There was always somebody passing away or somebody that was sick or like, nobody ever came in and was like, you know what? I want my baby mama's name. Where was the baby mama's episode of Miami?
Yeah, man. That's
where was the flaming skull? Because it looks cool. Episode of Miami Inc.
That is hysterical, man. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, you're right.
Everybody had this like heavy. Well, I'm getting this tattoo because of.
Yeah.
I saw it on Pinterest and I think it looked cool.
There was what other show is like that where it's always like, you know what? So I watch Chopped, and I know you bust my balls all the time about watching cooking shows or whatever, but hey, it's kind of cool. I like it. I used to cook in a kitchen back in the day. So
I like Spam.
They always there's somebody on there that's always got some kind of sob story about why they need to win for the money. And it's like, dude, it never fails. It's like that person's the one 9 times out of 10 that wins. And I'm like, did they win because of the sob story?
Maybe.
I think it is, man. I think it is. Talk amongst yourselves while I fix my microphone.
So you got to wonder about the whole idea of at what point did tattooing become a competitive sport?
Oh.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I guess it started at tattoo conventions, right? With who's got the tattoo contests. But really, like, at what point did it become jock tattooing where we're going to hand out trophies?
Well, I mean, they were handing out trophies right from the beginning. Cliff Raven won the at the very first tattoo convention, won the tattoo artist of the year or whatever
in Reno.
No,
I don't know. The earliest one I know about it was in Reno. There's that famous picture of all the guys are.
Man, it was right on the tip of my tongue, and I totally forgot where it was at, but it wasn't.
JC Fly was in there.
So last week we touched on this real quick. We talked about Sailor Jerry, Ed Hardy owning the rights to some of the stuff, Mike Malone, and there was some stories that were kicked around. RC actually sent me a text and said, "Hey, this is what he heard. You have a book here from," I believe it was Ed Hardy that put that book out, correct?
Yeah. This was
so American Tattoo Master, Sailor Jerry Collins. He has his, depiction of kind of some of the things that we're going to talk about. And I have an article that I sent to Justin so we could kick it around and talk about it. We're going to bring that article up. And I think part of this is the reason why I wanted to do this was because it's going to reinforce what I kind of have been trying to say, even when I'm talking about doing my history stuff. There's a lot of word of mouth. And the only people that are really going to know the truth are the people that were there.
Yes.
And unfortunately, with a lot of this stuff, especially the stuff that I'm doing lately, those people are long gone. So,
and you know, it's very clinical when you're reading the history of anything. Like, it's very clinical. You know that the actual events in any given story were way messier than that. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was way more human drama between people than this happened and this happened and this happened. And then, like, you know, me and a friend of mine were talking about before the live stream, everybody is the hero of their own story, right?
Yep.
We've talked about this before. Like, if Burt Grimm was telling the story, you know, Burt Grimm was the center of the story.
Right. You know, sorry. You're never going to paint yourself as being the bad guy.
Right.
No matter how honest a person you consider yourself to be, you're never going to paint yourself to be the bad guy. So, you know, I think it depends on who's telling the story sometimes. You know, one of the things that I struggle with on my own end is, you know, there is only so many pictures out there that I can use for B-roll. And unfortunately, some of those pictures, or majority of those pictures, have some type of watermark on them. And they've been claimed by a certain individual from down south.
Right.
And, you know, I don't want to step on anybody's toes and put their stuff out there. But, you know, like, you know, I have to go out of my way to try to find alternate versions of those pictures or whatever. So this way I'm not getting banged on some kind of copyright infringement or whatever else. So, you know, it's frustrating. But I think this is going to be a really good story for everybody because we have a good group of people here.
Hey, everyone.
That seem to be into the history of things, and you got some cool, like, we can kind of back and forth with each other about this, and you know, I think we can kind of hash this out and make a informative guess at the end.
You know, I think the first thing that has to be acknowledged is the fact that up to a certain point in tattooing, like, it was just rough. It was a rough world, and nobody was thinking about things like intellectual property. No one was thinking about, you know, Charlie Wagner. I mean, he drank coffee laced with morphine every morning.
Yeah.
Right. Like, he wasn't thinking about what's going to happen to my stuff after I die.
Well, and another part of this that you know, I think we've mentioned before, but, you know, we got a couple new people in here, so we'll say it again real quick. But none of these older guys, the OGs, we'll call them, thought that this was going to turn into what it turned into.
Absolutely. I'm not even an OG.
And you never thought it was going to turn into
never.
Right? So there you go. I mean, this has turned into something well beyond what anybody originally thought it was going to be. There was, you know, back in the day, there were certain people that were like, you know, big name or whatever, but it's not like it is today.
So an interesting part of that is, did you know that societies actually go through times where body modifications, tattooing or other body modifications become like the norm?
Yeah.
Like with I think it was either the Aztecs or the Incas, they shaped their heads. They shaped their heads so that their foreheads sloped backwards more.
Yeah. You know, I don't know which one it was, but I do remember seeing that.
The Japanese bound their feet, bound the feet of their women.
Yep. the African tribe where they do the rings in their neck,
right? And they do the keloid scarring, like, or even the Templar Knights during the Crusades would get crosses tattooed on their foreheads.
right?
So there are times like we're in a time now in American society and Western society where body modification by tattooing has become the norm,
Right.
right?
So let's say hello to the people that have actually stopped in tonight.
Hi.
So we got Tom's on, Sarah's on, OG Sarah. We got Luz from Mexico, Luz. We got Fat Cracker representing Lower East Side.
Nice.
Got Drag. We got Johnson, X Johnson. And X Johnson has a question for you because just so you know, X Johnson, I'm not a tattoo artist. I'm just a tattoo enthusiast. So this would be for you. Have either of you ever told someone what they can or can't have tattooed by you? You've talked about this before, so I know you
Yes.
have.
Yes, I have.
You want to explain yourself?
So, if a person wants to get tattooed, if a person wants to get a tattoo that's fundamentally harmful to them, I won't do it. Like the $200 or $300 that I make off the tattoo is not going to be worth the suffering that that tattoo might, entail for their life. For instance, when I was first tattooing, I was tattooing in Trenton, New Jersey. Kid came into the shop, wanted to get a Grim Reaper, and the Grim Reaper that he wanted had a rebel flag as the robe. This wasn't something I did. This was something that was done in the shop where I was working. This was the late 90s. And everybody in the shop was like, this is a bad idea, bro. You can get this Grim Reaper, that Grim Reaper. And he was like insistent. I want the Grim Reaper with the Confederate flag robe. So I forget who did it on him, but he came back in like 3 months later, right? And he was like lumped up because my man had gotten caught up in some kind of thing and gone to the workhouse in Ewing with his little rebel flag Grim Reaper tattoo and gotten his ass kicked every day.
Right. But
so it's things like that. Like, why would I tattoo something like that on somebody when it's gonna ultimately harm them? Why would I tattoo? These kids came in one time and they wanted wings that went up their necks onto the sides of their faces. And they had some kind of story that one kid was like, I'm a rapper and this guy's my producer. And I was like, well, where's your stuff? Apple Music, Spotify, like, where is it? And we don't have anything yet.
yeah.
Well, they worked at Burger King. I'm like, well, then you're Burger King workers. You don't get your fucking faces tattooed.
Right.
Because it's going to cost you in the long run.
So there you go, Mr. Johnson. I think that answers your question. I think that a majority of places these days, and I say that a majority, not all, are kind of in the same boat.
And there are tattooers that I respect, tattooers that are good guys, that are square tattooers, who are of the idea that if I don't do the tattoo, and there's truth to this, right? So I don't do the wings on that kid's face. He's not going to say to himself, you know what? Justin down at Ennsville said that that's a bad idea. I'm not going to do it. He's going to find the guy that's going to do the wings on his face. So there are friends of mine that they'll tattoo you what you want to get tattooed.
Right.
Because their idea is that them not tattooing you isn't going to stop the tattoo from being put on. So they might as well do it well, and they might as well make some money off of it.
Fat Cracker said SoundCloud rappers. There you
SoundCloud rappers.
There you go. I mean, there was also
they were young, dude. They were young.
There's also talks of, there's been times where people have talked about, Flash has kind of hit the end of the road. Certain Flash should be banned or put away. Look, the bottom line is, I'm just going to say it like this. some big badass biker dude walks in here, covered in neck to toenails and tattoos, and says, "Yo, man, I want a Grim Reaper with a rebel flag on it." I don't. I would have to say it's a fair bet that it's okay to do that.
I mean,
It might not be okay politically,
it is highly subjective.
but that dude obviously has 0 F's.
All right,
And
so
he's already, walked that path. He understands. Here's a better way to put it. He understands what comes with tattoos.
so it's a slippery slope in that, like, let's say somebody comes in here and they want a Baphomet tattooed on them.
Okay.
They want a super satanic tattooed on them. I don't necessarily agree with Satanism like that, but who am I to say no?
Right.
Or they want a Che Guevara, or they want a sickle and hammer tattooed on them. Well, who am I to say no?
Right.
Or like, it is funny to me that in the tattoo world now, people will tattoo all kinds of fringe, crazy stuff on people, but then draw these hard lines with like, oh, it's wrong to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I don't know.
Huh?
I think it's subjective.
one of those. It's one of those. How does it fit your criteria? How does it fit what you think is appropriate and what's not appropriate? So at that point, I think if you take the stand that you do, you squash everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, you leave it at this weird line where it's like, I'm trying to say this politically correct but you do this thing where it's like, you're going to tell a young kid, you're going to ruin your life.
Right.
But if it's this other dude that walks in that's covered from head to toe, okay, what do you want?
What do you want?
Yeah. I mean,
and
I
then
don't know, man.
It is like, my friend Topper has a story about Tommy Knapp. Topper had an idea about how things should happen in the tattoo shop. He was working with Tommy Knapp, who's an old school guy from Philly. And Tommy was like, no, it doesn't work like that. This is how it works. And Topper, in one of the interviews I saw, the interview he did with Eric Perfect, he said, and if you said, no, Tommy, it doesn't work like that, you were going to get the shit kicked out of you and put out on the sidewalk.
Yeah. I mean, and those days are over.
But I've had clients where I was like, I'm not going to do that. And
Right.
they got like abrupt.
Yeah, they get pissy.
Yeah. Like, what do you mean you won't tattoo my name on my girlfriend's face?
So, Tommy just said, when, in your opinion, should you get job stoppers? In my opinion, and opinions are like assholes, everybody's got one. So take it with a grain of salt. I think if we're talking job stopper tattoos, if you have yourself a career, not a job, there is a difference between a job and a career. And your career is acceptable with tattoos that are considered job stoppers. Sorry, didn't mean to fumble on my words. Then by all means, go ahead. But until you get to that point where you're working a career and you don't have that figured out, you probably shouldn't do it. If you look, okay, I don't have anything on my hands because fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, I still work in a corporate America job. So I'm in a position where my neck, hands, head can't really be tattooed if I want to go ahead and get a job somewhere down the line. God forbid I had to find another job or whatever, that might cause me to not be able to get that job. Now, if I was doing sound still and was doing a professional sound guy job, and that was, hey man, this is what I'm going to do till the day I drop dead, because retiring is really not an option, then you know what? I probably would be hands. I would have probably my head done. I mean, I say it all the time, man, and people laugh because they're like, "Oh, Bam Bam Bigelow," and I'm like, "Fuck you." But I would. But right now, I can't. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom.
So the other thing, so if we're talking about like facial tattoos, because I mean, I think that if I know all kinds of union guys and guys in the trades that are killing it,
Yeah,
that are making six figures plus,
right. But they're
who are really tattooed
right.
because in their trade,
It's not a big deal.
it's not an issue.
Just like if you're a professional chef.
But on the other hand, like, it's not only not to be weird or whatever, but I mean, I scare people. There's a whole group of people that get scared of me, like in the supermarket, in the bank, uh, in the mall, because they don't have enough sense to walk up to me and say, "Hey," so I can be like, "Hey, man, I'm a goofy tattooed guy."
Yeah.
They just see the facial tattoos and the beard, and I get cataloged under
Mm-hmm.
the other.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I get it too. So I mean, I know exactly where you're going with that, but
like I remember when my oldest daughter's 28. When she was a kid, I was already pretty heavily tattooed, and I'd be like in a public place with her, being a dad, and people would make comment like,
yeah.
I can't. Like, what do you think? Tattooed people eat their children? So that's the other thing you have to consider if you want to get like heavily tattooed on your hands and face. It's not just your job; it's your everyday life. Like there is no anonymity anymore.
Right. I mean, for me, it's summertime and wintertime are two completely different things when I'm out in the public. Like,
Right.
let's talk grocery store, right? It's wintertime. I got a sweatshirt on. Nobody can see my tattoos. Now I'm still a pretty big dude with a shaved head and a goatee, so I don't know how much of that necessarily disappears, but I would say it probably lessens.
Yeah.
And then when summertime rolls around and I got no sleeves on, then they see the big dude, shaved head, goatee, covered in tattoos. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. But hey, it kind of goes with the territory. Fat Cracker just had a really good point, super valid point, actually, for when is a good time to go ahead and get job stoppers. Um, when people work for you, not you working for them, or you win the lottery. Um, that is going to be one of those things that, you know, um, yeah, I mean, look, you own your own business and you're doing your own thing.
When it's no longer an issue.
It's not an issue anymore because at this point you are your own boss, and if it's the type of business where it's not going to impact whatever business you're doing. So here's a great example, and I know we're going to get into this topic, but I think this is a good topic to talk about as well, so it's worthy of our time. We know somebody that is not a tattoo artist, heavily tattooed hands, neck, and he owned his own carpet company.
Yes.
Okay. Now, dude does phenomenal work, has a very successful business.
And now the other point too is a veteran and is very proud of being a veteran,
Right.
which is definitely in some people's mind that's definitely a plus.
So he you know, it's it's hampered him on occasion when he walks into people's houses, and then they get past it real quick. But he's his own boss, so it doesn't really matter. He's also the type of guy that if like you said, "Hey, I don't want uh you working at my house," he'd be like, "All right, whatever," and fine, because there's plenty of other jobs for him. So I think that's kind of the mentality of, you know, really understanding where you're going to be in life. I think I know myself personally. I thought I knew everything when I was 21 years old. And now I'm the age I am. I realize I didn't know shit. So it's just one of those part of growing up things. Unfortunately, when you're in that age range and you're deciding to make life altering choices, because tattoos aren't going anywhere, that's forever. Just like having a kid, it's forever, you know? So,
So years ago, a local shop tattooed darkness like this big, like across the kid's throat, his entire throat. And I remember thinking that's really irresponsible. I mean, this was probably the early 2000s, before 2010, and yeah, I saw the kid a couple years later, and the tattoo removal thing was definitely not as accessible as it is now, and he was going through pretty painful laser treatments to get that tattoo taken off his throat because it just hindered him.
Drag said, in my trade, it's important to look like this. Uh, they every time said to my daughter, she is pretty, but her dad is ugly.
Nice.
Drag, you're a tattoo artist, so it kind of goes hand in hand. But all right, let's jump into this. So I'm going to bring up an article. I believe that this article was written in 2014, and I got to get to it. No, I'm sorry. This was actually 2020 that this was put out. And this was published by Michael Corcoran. And it does say December 14th or December of 2014. So they must have republished it. And in this article, it gets into the fact that Sailor Jerry's rights to his stuff, where we talked about it last week, whether, it came into question. This article kind of gets into it. And I believe, from what I understand of this article, it kind of sounds to me like it's coming from the Shanghai Kate, Mike Malone side of the story.
Well, Shanghai Kate and Mike Malone's side of the story were two completely different side of the story. Malone definitely came down in Hardy's camp.
Okay.
It did.
So it starts off with them really kind of talking about Sailor Jerry, how he came about, how Mike Malone came into the picture, how Kate came into the picture, how Ed Hardy came into the picture. We don't really need to get into that. I think we kind of covered enough of that last week.
Well,
I mean, we didn't cover the Mike Malone and the Kate part, but
no, it is important,
okay.
Right? It is important that Jerry's widow offered Jerry's shop to Don Hardy, Zeke, or Mike Malone.
Right.
That's who she offered it to. She didn't offer it to Shanghai Kate.
Right.
No disrespect to Shanghai Kate's memory, but it wasn't offered to Shanghai Kate. It was offered to Malone.
I thought one of the things that I thought was funny in here was he says in here is a fame that would have probably sickened Taylor or Sailor Jerry, who used to refer to publicity seeking tattoo artists like Lyle Tuttle as prostitutes.
Prostitutes, yeah. Lyle Turtle. He called him Lyle Turtle. Because, Jerry was not of the Burt Grimm school of thought. He thought that a journalist, anybody coming into the shop, was going to ultimately do damage to the shop. They were going to write some kind of scathing article. There's actually a story, maybe it was Davy Jones. Guy came in and said, I want to write about tattooing. And then the final thing the guy was trying to say was, it's just men that want to touch each other. And Davy Jones has a story about, I took the guy and I bodily threw him out of the shop. And, that was the idea, that Oh, sorry. Stop picking your tattoo. I tattooed on it on myself. I can pick it if I want. So a lot of these guys didn't trust media at all.
Okay. So, where this article really comes into play as to what we talked about last week was this sentence right here. But the Richter needle would have jumped with the claim that Jerry's widow, Louise Collins, that she never gave permission for those uses as and has been bypassed by the proceeds. So,
which was true when the article is written and is no longer true.
Right. We'll get to that at the end.
Right.
As long as we don't, I don't get long-winded.
So it's fair to say that Don Hardy owns the publishing company. Don Hardy and Malone own Jerry's stuff. Owen Jensen and Joe Lieber are not the. We've talked about this before. Owen Jensen was just as good a tattooer as Jerry, just as prolific. Maybe not as prolific a flash painter, but definitely Jerry had all kinds of respect for Owen Jensen. But Don Hardy didn't own Owen Jensen's stuff.
Right.
So the guy that owned the publishing company put forward Jerry as he's the godfather because I own his things.
Hey, before we get any further, guys, please make sure you smash that like button real quick so we can push this out to some other people. Maybe we can get some other people in on this conversation tonight. And we'd love to have some new listeners. So please do that for us.
And not to be cynical, but even prior to, Mike McCabe wrote the New York Oral History of Tattooing book, which brought light to Polito, Brooklyn Blackie, Philadelphia Eddie, like the Greco brothers. Prior to that, I mean, they were, if you knew them, you knew them. But that book definitely launched them into like the greater tattooing consciousness.
Yeah. So one of the other parts here that I want to get into is it goes into where they were talking about this filmmaker that was following around Shanghai Kate, who they called the godmother of American tattooing. And they tracked down Lois Collins, who lives in an apartment with her daughter, Sailor Jerry's kid. In her first interview on camera, Lois told Lancaster that she's never received any compensation as executor of her husband's estate from either Gyro Worldwide, the Philadelphia, which I didn't know, by the way, that I was kind of blown away when I read that, the Philadelphia company, which started developing the Sailor Jerry brand in 1999, or the Scottish-based William Grant & Sons alcohol company that bought the Sailor Jerry brand at Tell. In 2008, the spiced rum is a hit with it. Well, we don't need to talk about that. You want to touch base on that real quick?
So, I mean, again, we have to think about the time. Like, Jerry would have never thought to sell his intellectual rights. It goes into something that says in that article is that ultimately it was just a bill of sale.
Right.
She gave Malone a bill of sale. And because at the time, no one would have thought that someday we're going to put these images on T-shirts. I mean, it was shitty what was done to her. That was a shitty thing. But to say that, I don't know.
So in here it says Malone and his girlfriend / partner at the time, Helen Brand, who owns a tattoo I don't need to talk about that, paid $20,000 to Lois Collins for Sailor Jerry's shop at 1033 Smith Street and its contents, which included Sailor Jerry's tattoo designs. But they also they did also buy Jerry's intellectual property.
They did or they didn't?
They did. But did they also buy Jerry?
No.
So that's the question. Sorry.
Because
thank you for
right, because at the time Like there was no intellectual property. You know, I remember hearing about there was a Denver tattooer who sued a video game developer because the video game developer used a custom tattoo that he had drawn and at this point I don't know if he had registered it as intellectual property or not, but he said, you know, in your video game you have an image that I created. And that was the first I ever heard of it, and that was probably in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And then we talked about when the photographer sued
Kat Von D.
Kat Von D over the photo.
Right.
But these are all recent developments, like lawyers and the idea of intellectual properties. These weren't, you know, that's not something that would have been considered.
So do you feel as though this is where the whole big business thing is being rolled into the craft?
Yes.
Which is also in your mind and amongst a lot of other tattoo artists' minds is going to either make or break the craft.
So, yes and no.
Okay.
There'll always be hardcore tattooers.
Right.
And if they're eventually forced underground by some McDonald's-esque tattoo corporation,
okay,
we'll always make our own needles. We'll always be able to mix our own inks. There'll always be a network of tattooers that are true to that ideal.
Okay.
That if you know people, you know people.
Right.
And, you know, like I'm probably like I didn't make my own needles using needle jigs because they were obsolete by the time I started tattooing.
Okay.
I know how to use them. I know how to make them.
Right.
But I never did it. Whereas guys that are like 10 years, you know, in the business longer than me, or maybe even 5 years in the business longer than me, that's what they did.
Right. Fat Cracker, we'll get to your comment in a minute because I don't want to get Justin sidetracked. I want to make sure we knock this out. So I'll save his comment for a minute. Okay, so, but did they buy his likeness and copyrights to all his work? Malone passed away in 2007, and his partner, Hardy, who made millions in the t-shirt business, believed they owned all things Sailor Jerry. And Gyro Worldwide, now named Quaker City Mercantile, seemed confident all the paperwork was in order when they plunked down. Oh, when they plunked down, I'm like, why does that not sound right? When they plunked down a reported $20,000 to Hardy and Malone for the rights in 2003. Quaker City owner Stephen Grasse, maybe, boasted in 2010 that he made some serious FU money when he sold Sailor Jerry name and intellectual property to Grant and Sons, which is the people that own the rum. QCM, Quaker City Management, was retained to handle advertising for the Sailor Jerry brand, including a current $7 million TV advertising campaign. So they made money coming and going. They made money off of selling the original whatever rights that they thought they had. And then now they're making money off of the advertising part of it. So, wow.
But see, that's not, you know, that's not Don Hardy and Mike Malone.
It is not.
Right.
And we're gonna get into that.
That's the company that they sold
right
the rights to.
It says in here, so the attorney isn't so sure and said copyrights as well as rights of publicity may have been violated. Hawaii law, blah, 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 states that every individual or personality has a property right in the use of the individual's name, voice, signature, and likeness. According to Hillenbrand, who said she borrowed $5,000 from her grandmother to make the down payment on the shop, the written contract between Malone and Jerry's widow, Lois Collins, was little more than a bill of sale, saying that Michael Malone bought Sailor Jerry's shop and its contents for $20,000.
And it's worth noting that there's people that say that Kate was Mike's girlfriend, and her biggest contribution to the whole event was stealing a bunch of Mike's shit when she left.
Right.
So, I mean, and that's an ongoing. It's like what you said. None of us were there.
So none of us will ever really know the true facts because the only people that are going to know are the people that were there.
Right.
You
And
know,
that's a messy thing when when your girlfriend leaves. That's a messy thing. So this is interesting about copyright law. So there was a band, you'll remember, not everybody watching will remember, called Men at Work.
Yeah.
And Men at Work used
come from a London under.
Yeah.
Every
and
time
one
I
of
hear
their,
that, I think of Family Guy.
they used a traditional Australian folk song. Now check this out.
Okay.
They used a traditional Australian folk song. Years after that album was released, somebody bought the rights to that folk song and then sued them retrospectively for usage rights on that folk song. So a guy that didn't own the folk song when the album was made was able through the Australian courts to take royalties from the record company for every record that was sold on something he didn't even own at the time. Right?
Yeah.
That's how fucking ridiculous that stuff is.
I mean, I actually
was it Louise's intent to sell everything Sailor Jerry to Mike Malone? Was that Jerry's intent?
I think the intent was to sell the shop.
Or was it to sell all of it? Because you talking about people that had no idea. Do I think that Malone and Hardy should have contacted? Well, without a doubt.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough call, dude. This is,
and that's no disrespect to Don Hardy.
This is one of those situations where it's like, somebody obviously got scammed, or feels as though they got scammed. But let me be the devil's advocate here.
Okay.
So, what if they paid her the $20,000, right? And nothing really came about? Would there be any complaints?
Exactly. What if all that flash just ended up being
whatever, just regular flash?
Right.
And it never turned into what it turned into.
Exactly.
It was just a purchase of a building with a bunch of flash, and here you go.
Right.
So had it not turned into anything, would there even be an
issue?
Right.
Right.
That's a tough call, man.
Like, how many people, so when I started tattooing, Spalding and Rogers would give you picture machine production sheets. They would give them to you because they were worthless, because no one wanted them. Everybody was doing National Brand, Cherry Creek Brand. Now, the same sheets that were being given out for free
are worth money.
No, I mean, they're online for like $20 a sheet.
I mean, dude, you got a whole stack of them for free, and now you can start selling for $20 a pop. That adds up quick.
Right. But so it's really, it's all subjective.
That actually kind of reminded me of,
if you think of Tuttle, what do you think Tuttle bought all of George Burchett's stuff for?
Right.
Or all of, when Milton Zeiss sold everything to Spalding and Rogers. Should Milton Zeiss be able to come back later and say, well, Spalding and Rogers is a multi-million-dollar company now?
Right.
And they started, with my stock.
I mean, look, if you can watch History Channel. I mean, there's something Build America.
The Men That Built America.
Dude.
They were bastards.
Dude, there's like episodes where a perfect example is the Kroc brothers or whatever that had McDonald's, and they sold it for I don't remember what the number was, but I'm going to say $150,000, dude. They didn't know it was going to turn into a couple $1 billion a year. Yeah, I mean, like ridiculous money.
The guys that
So-
sold the rights to Superman, the 2 kids that created Superman, they were kids. Did they retain any of those rights?
So how does this parlay into somebody now that is an artist that's out there busting their ass? They're drawing new Flash, and okay, you and I've talked about this before. There's tons of Flash out there that's been altered. So they may have started off with Sailor Jerry type of Flash, and then they altered it and turned it into their own thing. But I'm talking about like people that are making like legit stuff out of thin air, creating their own stuff, and now they're becoming tattoo artists and they're doing it. Where do we go with that?
If they don't copyright their brand, then it's
Free game?
free game.
Okay.
Because now we live in a situation where everybody acknowledges that that's part of it,
Right.
right? So even like say Martin LaCase from Philadelphia, prolific artist, right? He's got 2 or 3 books out, and he says that if you're going to use the designs in these books, just tell whoever you're tattooing that they're my designs. Don't claim them for your own. Like, he acknowledges that by putting out these books, tattooers are going to use them for design work.
Oh shit, we got our first super chat. Our first ever super chat.
What's that mean?
Dude, I'm blown away. Thank you to Medusa's Noggin for our first ever super chat. She said, "What about the current shop at the location? On another note, are there any recordings of Jerry's radio shows?"
I don't know.
So, first off, thank you. I appreciate
you.
that
Wow.
for the $10 super chat.
How much of that do I get?
None.
See? Business, baby.
No.
Business.
Well, I still got to recoup my stuff for the show. So somebody asked me this the other day. I don't, it may have been on Instagram. I searched for a couple hours solid because, in all honesty, I was curious myself. Stop looking at your phone.
No, I'm looking it up now.
I searched and I could not find. The closest thing I got to finding the old Ironsides chats was a radio archive website, and I think you had to pay money in order to get into it. But as far as like anything out there floating on the internet, I could not find anything, so I'm not really too sure. As far as what about the current shop at that location?
Old Ironside Tattoo.
And it's still open.
Yes.
And do you know who it's owned by?
No, but I'm looking at if
that's what came up for when so they're doing some kind of podcast. That they're calling it the Ironsides podcast or something, which is I'm definitely gonna have to check it out, but I could not for the life of me, and I'm really good at digging. So if I had a hard time finding it, I'm really gonna say it's somewhere where you got to pay for it, because I'm not gonna pay for it. But dude, I'm freaking stoked that we got our first super chat, man.
And I don't think anybody would really want to hear what Sailor Jerry had to say.
He was not very politically correct.
No.
And it's funny because we talked about in Sailor Jerry's American Tattoo Master book here, he talks about having his last apprentice,
Mick,
which was a female.
Yes.
And we've said this on numerous occasions where had he really known that Ed Hardy was smoking pot and whatever, like it actually says in this article, Sailor Jerry was not a fan of hippies.
So Jerry
was just old school.
He tried to re-enlist for World War II. I mean, Jerry was a man of his time. Jerry You know, he had the opinions that men of his time had. You know,
Yeah.
and
I mean, I'd like to hear it.
I as a, I think
Ieza?
I think as an older person, I'm more accepting that people in the 1950s and 1960s had the opinions they had versus say people that are younger who are like, I mean, I've heard Jerry called a racist on multiple occasions
Yeah.
and a bigot and a homophobe, and because he was.
I mean, in his letters, dude, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
There's a picture in here where it shows him tattooing a Filipino guy, and the guy is like screaming,
yeah.
and he's got a there's a handwritten note on the letter, "Be kind to Gooks Week." I mean,
Yikes.
that's what Jerry had written on the letter. So
Yeah. If I do happen to find that though, Medusa,
am I going to get in trouble for saying that?
Yes, you are going to. We might get nicked for that. If I do find it though, I will post it. So it's going to be tough, man. I really did. I really did search for that for almost an hour and a half the other day when somebody brought. It might have been you. So,
And I think if that was accessible, it would be accessible.
Fat Cracker said, "Open mind equals micro or macro perspective. Closed mind equals micro perspectives." Yeah, I mean, like Justin said, it's you got to take the time period into consideration when you are reading some of these letters that Jerry wrote, or even if you were to listen to that and find that podcast of the replays of his recordings. Man, Fat Cracker said a little off topic, but he wanted to make sure you heard this. To your point about lasering tattoos off, I have a face tattoo of a tattoo machine tattooing Laser Away, the tattoo laser removal company. And I also have Dr. Tat Off tattooed on my knuckles.
Nice.
So
when people ask me what the most pain I've ever been in getting tattooed, years ago at the Philadelphia convention, a guy came up from DC, a pretty well-known tattooer, and he'd gone and taken the laser classes in Arizona at the time, got himself a laser because his idea was that it would be best to get tattoo removal from a tattooer. And what he was basically offering was you could go up to his hotel room and you could get laser tattoo removal, but there was no anesthetic.
Yikes.
So I have a tattoo on the back of my head that I wanted to get rid of. And he did the laser treatment on the tattoo. By the time I made it downstairs, I was like staggered. I had to sit down. I just,
So before we get too far, I just want to bring this back up real quick because in here, at towards the end of the article, there is a sentence where it says, and I think you guys really should check this out if you really want to look into this, though. It's on michaelcorcoran.net. You just go under tattoos and you'll find it, where they said that they felt as though that I doubt they have a contract that actually states they were getting the intellectual property when they purchased the tattoo shop from the estate. But also at the very end of this article, just so everyone knows, the family of Sailor Jerry settled with William Grant and Sons in October of 2020. Amount paid to them is confidential. So it does look like at some point, Sailor Jerry's family was compensated some type of money for the intellectual property / whatever. I don't know if it's to the extent that everybody feels as though is fair, whatever. I don't know because it's confidential on what they got. So we just wanted to bring this up because it did come up last week, and I felt like we kind of left it hanging, and we were tiptoeing around it because RC was the one that actually brought it up and kind of sent a text to me about it, and I didn't have the facts in front of me, or what, not facts, because like we just said, it's kind of goes with who only the people that were there are the only ones that know, but I didn't have the story in a full capacity in front of me. Um, Justin has the book here. It talks about it on a different light. So there,
and
it's
also, Furry, Furry comes down pretty hard on Malone's side.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing is that there are almost two sets of camps with this scenario, where there is a camp that comes down on the Mike Malone side, and then there's a camp that comes down on the, I guess, the Kate side.
So what this is like a funny, not a funny story, but it illustrates what's going on to a degree. So Furry was friends with Malone. He was hanging out with Malone one time, and Jerry stencils are on the internet now, maybe 50, 100, a couple $100, depending on the size of the stencil, right? Some of them are really expensive. Furry said Malone was just pulling stencils out by the handful.
Yeah.
Because he had thousands, and he was like, "You want them? You want them here? Just take them."
Well,
because it didn't, like, at the time, again, he would never have thought, well, I'm giving this other tattooer $10,000 worth of stencils.
Yeah. What kind of when you just said that, man, I really the thought that came into my head was the show that we were at up in North Jersey when Jesse Martinek was there. And Jesse, who does a phenomenal Instagram page, Body Graphics, you should check it out, dude. It is
Hilarious.
hysterical. His skits that he does, man, I freaking die.
Not for the easily offended.
Not for the easily offended. But he had stencils, and Justin bought a couple that were his grandpops.
Yeah, we're Pat Martinek's.
So, he realized that Justin was a collector and was collecting them to put them in his shop, because Justin has a nice glass case here with some cool stencils and stuff in it, along with some really nice machines.
Thanks, Buck.
He didn't have a problem selling them to Justin, because he had said prior to that there were a couple shows where he had them, and he realized that there were these guys that were coming there to buy them, and immediately they weren't even out of the building yet, and they were already putting them on eBay or auction houses.
So it's like the thing with I never realized why baseball players don't sign memorabilia for little kids. I was like, why wouldn't that son of a bitch sign that baseball for that 10-year-old? Well, because in that world, that 10-year-old is really going to give the baseball to his dad, who is then going to turn around and sell the baseball as a signed piece on an eBay sports collection page. Like, things are not always as they appear, is what I mean.
Right.
So, and I have stencils. There was a tattooer in Jersey for years named Bingo.
Mm.
And Bingo was a big part of the Philadelphia tattoo culture at one point. Tattooed out of Pensacola Mart, and he used to, Bingo used to do names just in his own handwriting.
Oof.
So it would be like, if you went in there, he'd be like, Buck, not in script, just like, but anyways, so the stencils I have from Bingo, right? No one is arguing with me about them, because they're only worth it to me because I have an interest in the tattooer himself.
Right.
Like, I have stencils from Captain Don Leslie, they're not necessarily worth anything. The Jerry stencils I have, and what's the difference?
Right. I mean, look, I think it's always going to, in my mind, it's always going to go back to, nobody ever thought this was going to turn into what it turned into. and the perfect example is the fact that Wagner's stuff was thrown out into a dumpster when he died.
Absolutely.
Some of the stuff was saved, but a lot of his stuff was thrown out because nobody at the time thought this was going to turn into what it turned into. The newer artists that are out there grinding, doing their thing, creating flash, making their own designs, you need to make sure that you go out of your way to copyright or stake your claim to whatever you're doing, especially not necessarily for flash in your own shop or whatever. Because look, let's face it, there's going to be people that are going to copy tattoos and do whatever. But if you're going to put flash out there, make sure your name's on it. Make sure you're getting paid for it. There are houses out there that will sell your flash for you, so this way you could make your money off of them. But you also need to understand that if you sell them, there's going to be somebody out there that's doing your tattoos because you sold the flash.
So there's a guy whose name I can't remember.
Am I talking out of my ass, or is that
no?
Okay, I'm just making sure.
There's a guy that sells. He sells prints of different punk rock bands like Black Flag, The Descendants, Rancid, Social Distortion, where he does little pork chop designs for each song.
Okay.
Right? Gaines. I think his name is Jeffrey Gaines, but don't quote me on that. But you can go, if you do a tattoo from his sheets of art that he sells, you can go on his Facebook and post them. And he absolutely welcomes it because he's not a tattooer. But that is the double-edged sword. You want to put art out on Pinterest and Instagram and Facebook, but the second it's posted, it is an ethical question. So, and I'm not going to answer it here, but it is a worthwhile ethical question if you're a tattooer. A client comes in with something on their phone that was obviously taken off of Pinterest and is a piece of flash from another artist who may or may not be okay with giving his permission for his work to be done. Right? There's the tentative okay because he posted it. Like, what ethically does the tattooer do then?
So I will say,
when the client says, I want this, I don't want your take on this. I want this.
I will say that the tattoo that I have on my forearm, and you really can't see it that well.
It's awesome.
Is actually a Tony Savaro piece, but it wasn't done by Tony. It was actually done by Bill Keithley, and Bill Keithley actually reached out to Tony Savaro and said, "Hey, look, man, I'm going to do this tattoo," and I've actually since shown it to Tony at a convention, and he loved it. But it's one of those things where he gave him the common courtesy, I guess, to say, "Hey, man, look, I'm getting ready to do this tattoo. Whatever." Dude, Drag said, "Can we see this?" I think he was talking about your glass case. So I'll try to take a good picture of it. If you got to see the Instagram reel that I made for
the
Justin,
shop commercial,
the shop commercial, it's actually in there. But yeah, man. I mean, I have a degree in music business, so I understand copyrights from a music perspective pretty well. I don't really necessarily know it from an art perspective. I think it was very eye-opening to me when I did the Kat Von D fair use video. I didn't know that was a thing, to be honest with you. I was completely floored.
Steamboat Willie
is now
public domain.
Yeah, so have at it for you people out there. But David Reed in the house. What's up, man? Just curious. So Dave is a long friend of mine, man, from way back when. Just curious, how often does artwork get blatantly ripped off when an artist's style is so obvious it shouldn't be replicated? Are you talking about as far as artwork, or are you talking about from a tattoo perspective, Dave? And hopefully this is Dave Reed that I'm friends with and not some dude named Dave Reed.
All right. So Leo Zuleta and Hanky Panky, right? Break tribal tattooing, right? I'm sure that there's other guys that were doing tribal tattooing before them, but as far as the big names, like Zuleta was doing tribal tattooing in LA, and Hanky Panky did a lot of personal research going going to Borneo, going to different Southeast Asian countries and documenting the tattooing that he sees, right? I remember one time I saw a license plate holder with a tribal design on it, right? Do you think that Zuleta or Hanky Panky received anything? I mean, think of the millions and millions and millions of dollars in flash, in T-shirts, in just stuff with tribal tattooed.
Yeah.
I mean, so these are the two of the guys that brought it forward and got nothing.
But they also brought it forward, but it was also somebody else's stuff before they brought it forward.
Right.
So I think that
But no Leo Zuleta, right? No
right.
Leo Zuleta, no Hanky Panky, no worldwide awareness of what Bornean
Yeah.
tattooing looked like.
Right.
No books about Bornean tattooing. No,
So Dave, I think what you're going at with this though is that
did they deserve to get anything?
no. I think where Dave's going with this is that there's definitely artists out there that make up their own from scratch out of their head.
Paul Booth.
There you go, perfect example.
Right.
So I'm sure there's people out there that copy or try to copy Paul Booth's stuff. Does Paul Booth get anything out of that?
So for every Paul, like, so we're in Philly. We're really super near Jersey. So for every in Booth tattoos in New York. So for every Paul Booth tattoo you see, there's about 10,000 Timu style Paul Booth tattoos that were done by just local guys who saw the tattooing and were like, "Oh, I can do that stuff," and just can't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer of if you see somebody's style, and they're creating their own thing and they're doing their own thing, go to that guy, go to that artist. I mean, really, if that's what you're doing, um, that's you should really be going to that person. You know what I mean? Like if I wanted a Paul Booth tattoo, I would go to Paul Booth. I wouldn't go to somebody that was like, "Hey, man, I think I can do a Paul Booth," or I've done Paul Booth stuff. Yeah, I could do it. You know, but that's just me, though, man. Like I'm true. I try to stay true to the.
So I usually get tattooed by either Mike Swaggart, Topper, or East Coast Charlie. But those are three guys that all know each other, that all have respect for each other. They're not even necessarily like in some kind of weird club or whatever. But if you say to Topper, "What do you think of Swaggart's work?" He's going to know. Same thing with Charlie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that you can do.
I mean, like, let's put it in art perspective, right? Banksy. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Everybody knows a Banksy when you see a Banksy. Would you be able to tell a difference of a copy of a Banksy? Or, I mean, and this is the average person.
No.
You know what I mean? Like I actually been watching this show and they on YouTube, and they actually did a Banksy tour where they went around to the different places where Banksy has done artwork. And there was actually one that was in question where they were like, they're not 100% sure if it was Banksy or not. It looks like it's a Banksy, but they're not sure.
So I met a girl on the train one time.
I met a girl on a train
who was I'm not going to say this word correctly.
Authenticator.
Yes.
Authenticator.
Authenticator.
There you go.
And she was an
We're
authenticator
uneducated. Sorry, folks.
of fine art because she was a lace expert. This is what she explained to me. So if a portrait is supposed to be from the 15th century, but obviously because they didn't have photographs back then, they would paint fabric patterns that they were familiar with, right? So if a portrait's supposed to be from the 16th century, but the fabric pattern in it is a pattern that didn't exist till the 17th century, she knew enough about fabric patterns and lace patterns to be able to say this couldn't possibly be a real Rembrandt, because this pattern did not exist when Rembrandt painted. Because because what she was, how do you say that word again?
Authenticator.
What she was authenticating was the difference. It's a genuine 300, 400-year-old painting, but it's not a 600-year-old painting. I just thought that was wild. I mean,
So
lace expert.
Medusa's noggin said, "I'm sorry to go on a crazy tangent here. Have either of you listened to Crazy Philadelphia Eddie audiobook? It's on Spotify." Yes, I have. And I actually reached out to the guy that put that out and I said, "Hey, man, I know it was put out a long time ago. Have you ever talked to somebody about cleaning up the audio? Because there's tools now that really clean that up, man, and it would sound amazing." Part of the problem is for the people that don't know Crazy Eddie or didn't really see him in person. It depended on what time of day you got a hold of Crazy Eddie.
Whatever do you mean, Buck?
Well, there is a reason why that every picture you've ever seen of him, he's got a screwdriver in at least one of his hands.
Always two. Always two.
So I'm saying at least one of his hands. But yes, I've heard it. I've listened to it. I've gotten through a couple of it. I love the early day stuff that he talks about where he's at Coney Island and stuff like that. But unfortunately, when they recorded that stuff, he was not always in the best room to do sound. There's some episode 3, I think it is, very echoey. The one episode, he's definitely slurring his words and he's feeling it. He's got the flow going. He's got the sauce. But yeah, it's pretty amazing to listen to hear his own take on a lot of different things. But
I have a signed copy.
I would really, really love to run that through a program and clean up some of that stuff because it could be 1,000 times better than what it sounds like on Spotify.
Just saying.
So yeah, there you go, Medusa. I've heard it. Justin's heard it.
Signed copy.
I actually have. I have a.
Did you? Oh no! Wait, I don't have a signed copy. You have.
I have your signed copy.
copy.
Yeah, because I'm working on a Philadelphia Eddie episode. Doing research for, but I have to be very, very, very. It's almost as bad as the Burchett one that I'm working on right now, man. Like I am trying so hard to dot my I's and cross my T's, man, because I just don't want anybody calling me out and being like, "That's not true. That's not right." I've went out of my way to get a hold of a historian that Lau Hardy put me in contact with. His name's Matt Lauder from the UK to bounce some facts off of. The guy Richter that wrote the book King of Tattooists, I've reached out to him. But because Philadelphia Eddie is my local legend and, there's still some people around that knew him well, I want to make sure if I do that episode, it is on point 100% because I don't want to have anybody locally calling me out or getting on my shit about getting a fact wrong or whatever. But
in the oral history books, I know for certain they're on the Lucky Tattoo Supply site, but I don't imagine that they're that hard to get your hands on.
Yeah,
the rest of them, I think there's like 5 or 6 of them.
So I actually bought the Moskowitz one.
Scab vendor.
Yeah, I bought them. So they're in the works.
So I was at when Eddie retired.
Later, Drag. I know Drag said he's leaving, and we didn't get to say goodbye to him. But go ahead, man.
So when Eddie retired, they had Brian the Intoxicated Limey on stage because that's what you want. Who you getting tattooed by tonight? Brian the Intoxicated Limey. And he would not get off the microphone. Like Eddie went up there, try to like get him off. Penny went up there, try to get him off. It was hilarious. He was just like in a fully incoherent, drunk, rambling speech.
It's one of the reasons why I had to quit drinking.
Just
Because I didn't know when to shut the hell up. But yeah, man, I would freaking love to get those cleaned up, but the guy didn't even answer me, so I'm a nobody, so why would he? And I don't know who. I don't know if it's somebody locally or not that did those, but
I mean, I'm not. There's guys that I'm not even going to say that I.
Fat Cracker said Jonathan Shaw, scab vendor.
Right, Confessions of a Scab Bender. That movie just premiered.
Yeah, it was 2 months ago.
And so I mean, I don't like when people claim to be like connected to somebody. So I mean, I don't. I was just another anonymous tattooer to Eddie, but he was always nonetheless, man.
I tell you what, man,
he was always decent.
I never had any problems with him, man. I mean, I wasn't around him probably nearly as much as you or whatever, but I would run into him at conventions or, stopping at the shop and whatnot. Back in the day, my brother Jack would he got tattooed down there a lot back in the day. So, he's got one on his arm. It was one of, I want to say it was one of the last couple that Eddie did or whatever, but he's had people stop him. Oh, which reminds me,
Moskowitz was scab merchant.
Yes.
Jonathan Shaw was scab vendor.
So my mom's in a rehab, and there was a gentleman that we were sitting outside talking to my mom outside the rehab facility. And there was a guy that was there, older gentleman in his probably 70s-ish, 60s-ish, that had some tattoos. And I stopped him for a second. I said, "Hey, man, who did your work?" And he showed me a pic. I actually took a picture of it. Sorry. He showed me his one tattoo, and he was like, "Yeah, man, this was done by Sailor Eddie in Camden in 1973." And I took a picture of it, and I actually sent it to Sailor Eddie Jr. And he was like, "Yeah, man, we're still doing that tattoo. We're the only ones that don't do, yellow horns and white pants or something." I forget what he said, but he was appreciative that I sent it to him. But it's weird to see old tattoos like that where you can see it was definitely pigment. You know what I mean? The colors were still pretty bright.
Right.
It was pretty amazing to see, man. I mean, I think that we're in an era that within the next 15 to 20 years, we're going to see a lot of people walking around with tattoos that fell out pretty quick. So, it's weird, man, because I really do DWT, driving while tattooed.
So I think that, all art forms, all forms of painting have rules for the medium, right? Like you can't paint with oil the way you paint with acrylics.
Yeah.
I mean, you're painting, but it's so
I'm saying, yeah, like I know.
So I always felt that tattooing as a medium has rules as to what will make a good tattoo. And naturally those boundaries can be pushed, right? The kids are skyrocketing through those boundaries. But we also, that's the thing about being a young tattooer, is that, I mean, I can produce tattoos that I did 25 years ago. But if you're a 20-year-old tattooer, 25 years ago that's not even in your consciousness.
I think where I was going with it was that when I first started to get tattoos and like I went to that chick Raven Cove and I was like, "This is the tattoo I want." She was like, "Well, you need to make it bigger because if it's too small or whatever, or it's too much detail, a couple years from now, you're not going to see it. It's going to be blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Oh, but I seen pictures of it, man. It looks great." And it's like, yeah, man, I wished there was a way that we could just get that into people's heads that, a lot of detail in a small little area is just not going to work. It might look good right now. It is not going to look good later.
So I have a weird tribal band on my arm, right? Because I was feeling myself one night when I was 17.
I don't want to hear about you feeling yourself, man.
And I plucked all these shapes. I wanted them to look like leopard skin, like all punk rock, like leopard skin. They don't look like leopard skin at all, right? So I go to this tattooer, Jim, in Seabrook, New Hampshire, and at the time, it's just like an outline of these shapes. And he's like, "Listen, man, I can blast something completely different over top of that." And I'm like, no, it's what I want. It's what I want, right? So he does. He blackens in the shapes. Doesn't look right. So I add a thing behind my arm. Doesn't look right. So I add a band above it and beneath it. Still doesn't look right. So I put red behind it. Still doesn't look right. I just gave up. I gave up. It took me like, I think 5 or 6 years to just accept the fact that I have this big ugly tattoo on my arm. But you couldn't have told 17 or 18-year-old Justin when the old tattooer was like, we could just cover that up right now because it was just picked in lines.
Yeah.
No, I know.
Well,
leopard spots.
For all you people here in the United States, happy Labor Day. Hope you enjoy it. Be safe. Don't get all shitty and drive. If you get shitty, call a cab or an Uber or get a buddy to drive you that's not drunk. And I hope you all are safe. Have a good holiday tomorrow. Thank you for coming out. Medusa's Noggin. Thank you for the super chat.
Thank you so much.
That is awesome.
So
I'm amped. So we got a super thank from Sarah, and we got our first super chat. We're on a roll, brother.
So if you are curious about Sailor Jerry, this book is still available. These are the letters these are portions of the letters that he wrote to Don Hardy. And there's a lot of, you can glean a lot of good information out of this book. So stay safe. Have a good Labor Day.
Don't forget, we're here every Sunday, 6 o'clock Eastern time. And thank you for stopping out.
Thank you.